Well, hi everyone. We got to the end of All's Well That Ends Well. Um, what a terrific play. Hope you enjoyed it. And let's talk about it a little bit. So there are three scenes in the fifth act. And, as usual with Shakespeare, towards the end of his plays, it's sort of all kind of you know, goes, I suppose, downhill towards the inevitable scene where kind of the revelation scene at the end. But anyway, scenes one and two. Scene one, Helen and the women are traveling from Italy to Roussillon. Everyone's going back to Roussillon for this sort of denouement, fancy word for ending. And I think it looks as though they might be in Marseille from the previous act. There was a reference to that. They thought the king would be there. They talked to a gentleman, but the gentleman says the king's already left. He's gone to Roussillon. And Helen gives him a letter. The gentleman says, hey, you're going to get there first. Give the king this letter. Scene two, parole. It's a parole scene. And we're in Roussillon, by the way. Parole's made it back. He's out of favour because of his humiliation. And LeFou makes fun of him, but then finally forgives him, and has mercy on him and takes him into his service. So perhaps then all's well that ends well for Parole. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Like he clearly wants to be playing in the kind of the big leagues, as it were, all the way through the play. He's humbled, he's humiliated, and now perhaps he's been put in his place. What does that say about this world? I think that's kind of interesting. The big scene, of course, though, is scene three. I've got a question mark here. All's well, question mark. The scene, now we're in Roussillon, and the king and the countess and LeFou are all unhappy that Helen is dead. They've heard that she's died. Of course, as Bertram and the Lord's heard back in Act 4. But they have decided that Bertram should marry LeFou's daughter, which Bertram seems perfectly happy about. The king also seems okay about it, but then he sees that Bertram is wearing a ring that was the king's, but that he gave to Helen when she cured him. And she said she'd never take it off until she gave it to her husband. So Bertram denies that this ring came from Helen, of course. He says it was thrown in his window. And the king, of course, suspects now that Bertram has killed Helen. You know, how else could he have got the ring? At this moment, the gentleman we just talked about in scene one, he shows up with the letter Helena gave him. But the letter is not from Helena. It's apparently from Diana, explaining how Bertram seduced her, which of course sends LeFou off into a rage, saying Bertram's a bad guy and he definitely doesn't want his daughter to marry Bertram now. Well, Diana shows up. She confirms that Bertram did try to seduce her. She also shows she's not lying because she has Bertram's ancestral ring. She's wearing it. And she says, moreover, that Parole can confirm her story. Parole is dragged on stage. He does confirm her story. Diana's kind of annoyingly unclear about how she got the ring until she sort of tells that great riddle about how she got it, and then that's sort of Helen's cue. And Helena comes on stage, Bertram pledges his love to her. Everybody's flabbergasted to see her, I should have said. Bertram fairly quickly says, well, I love, I'll pledge myself. There's kind of an interesting if before it, if you really are who, and he has this couple of lines saying, okay, I'll pledge myself to you. And all's well that ends well, apparently. The king says all yet seems well. I think there are a lot of question marks about this ending and who's happy and who's not happy and how much is really resolved. A little bit of a detour here, which I thought we shouldn't leave the play without talking about. I'm not sure where to put my head. Tell you what, have a look at the painting first. This is a painting, I can't remember, it's a rather famous painting, isn't it? Who's it by? It's called A Hunt by Night, I believe. Italian painting. And it goes with the role of the courtier. I wanted to just share with you what are the roles expected of a courtier and a woman, a noble woman in Shakespeare's time. And of course, for Shakespeare and for many others, a really important book at this time was The Courtier by Castiglione, Italian writer, first written in 1528, translated into English in 1561. This is the edition that Shakespeare would have read by a guy called Thomas Hoby. And I don't have time to go through all of this. You could always pause this and look at all these bullet points. And these are not all the things that Castiglione lists. There's maybe 50 or 60 items, he says in his book, that this is just a short excerpt from the book, that a courtier should have. But I thought this is a lovely title, A Brief Rehearsal of the Chief Conditions. This of course are Hoby's English spellings from the 16th century, and qualities in a courtier. So here are some of them. To be well born and of a good stock. Well, we know that that's important for Bertram. Not to be womanish. Not to crake and boast of his acts. Don't be boastful. Bertram maybe is a little... It goes against some of these. To do his feats with a sleight as though they were rather naturally in him than learned with study. Great Italian word for this is sprezzatura. Right, appearing to not really try hard. No liar, no flatterer, to be well spoken of, to have languages, to be skillful in martial feats, good on horseback. This is an interesting one here. Not to seek to come up by any naughty or subtle practice. So don't be underhand. Bertram, what are you up to in Italy? And also look at this one. His love toward women not to be sensual or fleshly, but honest and godly, and more ruled with reason than appetite, and to love better the beauty of the mind than of the body. Nice ideas, although when we look at the women's list, you'll see that there's an expectation that men will be chasing after women. So perhaps this one there's a bit of a double standard here. Men should be like this even though they're kind of like this. Well, let's look at the women's list. Again, this is a list of ideal qualities. See if you can see this. This is a print again from the 16th century of noble women. So what's expected of a woman? Well, to be, guess what, well born and of a good house. That's something that counts against Helena, right, for Bertram. To flee affectation or curiosity. That's quite interesting. Don't be affected. To be natural in your behaviour. But to flee curiosity, don't be too curious. Interesting. To have a good grace in all her doings, to be of good condition, well brought up, to be witty, but not heady and of a renning wit. Don't be that. That sounds like, again, you should be sort of good in your place. Don't be too headstrong. No vices, to have the virtues of the mind, like wisdom, justice, nobleness. This is an interesting one. Be discreet. Now here's one here. To shape him that is over saucy with her, or that hath small respect in his talk, such an answer that he may well understand she is offended with him. There's an expectation, perhaps, that some men are going to be naughty, saucy. They're going to be maybe like Bertram in Act 4. And as a woman, you have to learn how to deal with that. Similarly, this bullet point, to be heedful, remember that men may with less jeopardy show to be in love than women. It's more okay for men in this society to express love. Women have to be very careful about it because of all the implications, as we've seen. And the rest of it is all very interesting here. To dance. To use a somewhat more familiar conversation with men. Like you could be a bit more familiar with older men, but it's not appropriate with younger men. Again, you've got to be careful. So a really interesting list of things. And I wonder if you went through this list and compared them to, say, Diana or Helena, or even the words of the widow and Mariana, how these fit with them. Okay, some final questions on All's Well That Ends Well. First of all, how are we supposed to understand Bertram as a character? He really just turns on a dime at the end, from going from, disliking her all the way through the play to, okay, maybe I can love her. And I think you've got to decide, is he like the character in the Globe production that I keep talking about, where he realizes there is something about her, perhaps he does love her, but that everything in his background, his class, has made him just never consider her as a partner. Or on the other hand, he doesn't love her at all, and he's just doing this for the king. And if it's the latter, of course, what an unappealing character, what a strange character. Why would Shakespeare have this character in a play? Very, very interesting. Second bullet point. Scholars, critics often refer to this play as a problem play. It doesn't easily fit the category of comedy or tragedy or history. What are some of the elements of that? Well, the king seems to quite easily do what Helena asks him to do, the sort of fairy tale stuff we talked about earlier, and his rhyming, or the rhyming in the play. Helena's love for Bertram. Why? We don't know. That's a problem. And then Bertram, problem. Do we even like him? The Globe production is a production where the director clearly feels as though if we don't feel something for Bertram, what's the point? Who wants to watch that? And finally, here's a thought. Maybe actually, and this is partly why I taught this play this year, there's something actually really modern or contemporary about this play. Maybe there's something a bit postmodern about this ambiguity of tone, the playfulness of the fairy tale. We didn't talk about this, but at the very end of the play is an epilogue spoken by not the king, but the person who plays the king. Now he's not in his costume. He's an actor. He's a human being. He's a normal person. He takes off the disguise, right? The mask. And it reminds us that we've been watching an artistic fabrication. He says, the king's a beggar. Now the play is done. Now the play's over. It's not the king anymore. Just whoever was playing the king. And actually now the audience becomes the active participants by clapping, says this actor. So that seems super postmodern and funky too, doesn't it? I think there's really something interesting about this play, and I hope you loved reading it, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me natter on about it as well. Take care, and see you maybe on another Shakespeare play.